Great. And here we are live for the Q&A session. Good afternoon, everybody. I trust you can all hear me. You see the panelists again, with the exception of Fabrice. He was excused, and as you could see, we might be dressed differently now than to what you have seen during the panel conversation. You guessed it right. We have obviously pre-recorded that session, and now the panel members are here live to address a couple of questions, and I have the pleasure to moderate the questions. And we have quite a couple of questions coming in, and let me start with one, most probably for Sanjeev to start with, but I would encourage all the other panelists to maybe think about an answer as well. What efforts are made by carriers to adhere to WHO GDP guidelines for pharma products at airports with minimal infrastructure? And I think all the countries are different, and I'm sure there's other opinions than Sanjeev's, but I hand over to you first, because you're flying to the most of the places, right? So you have a good understanding of what you would like to see.
Thank you, Remo. This is such a great question, because the whole issue of quality and compliance are very important parts of the vaccine supply chain. And there are two things that we need to look at. One is the IATA CEIV certification, and the other one is the WHO GDP certification. And what we've actually seen in a lot of the airports is that there is hardly any compliance, especially when we're talking about the secondary airports. When you're looking at the best airports in Africa, Nairobi, Johannesburg, Addis Ababa, Cairo, Lagos, Accra, you have a good effort which is made by the ground handling agents to comply with WHO and IATA standards. But when you're looking at airports which are operated only by one ground handling agent, and this is the case with about 80% of Africa's airports, where you only have one ground handling agent, and it's often the national carrier or a parastatal, then we've actually got a big challenge. So what we are doing is we're working very closely with the host airports by actually encouraging them to build capacity in terms of training. And as long as they have trained personnel who can actually be able to manage the quality guidelines as directed by WHO and IATA, then I really believe a lot of good things can come out of it. But in the absence of that, we also have to work through the Ministry of Health, because the Ministry of Health in every country has trained personnel because they've actually been given that capacity building in support by the African Union and also by a lot of the organizations. So we have to work with them to actually make sure that they are at the airport when the flight arrives, and not 2 hours after the flight has arrived. And we have to actually make sure that we provide them with all the support that is required, or the requirements of the vaccine, so that when we actually handing it over to them, beg your pardon, when we're handing it over to them, that they're actually able to receive the vaccines in the same condition that we've received it in, and to actually make sure that the rest of the journey can be completed in a very responsible and in a very transparent manner. Thank you, Remo. These are my contributions.
Thanks, Sanjeev. Any other of the panelists would like to share thoughts about infrastructure or lack thereof, and what we'd like to potentially see changed in the future? Cedric, please.
Thank you, Remo, and indeed a really good question. First, we have also to remember that the continent received above 1 billion doses of vaccines on a yearly basis, and this is for routine immunization. So WHO, Gavi, UNICEF has already worked since decades with the different Minister of Health, as Sanjeev was mentioning, to make sure that these products are handled with all the cautious and all the accountability required, and to make sure that we then have a proper management and a proper distribution. The complexity here is the multiplication of specification, and that we have from a normal range of vaccines from 2 to 8 temperature to also -70, with the ultra cold chain vaccines. So, but these ones are also coming with specific specification and packaging. But indeed, as Sanjeev explained, we are working in close collaboration with the airports and with the Minister of Health to make sure that we have the minimal waste and that everything is managed properly. And up to now, we have not heard any issues at the port of entry, at the handling of and handing over up to the Ministry of Health. So everything goes well, and it's capitalizing on really decades of experience of routine immunization vaccines management. Over.
Thank you. Makes absolute sense. Anthony, please.
Yes, thank you so much, colleagues. And I'm very glad to have had actually these experiences coming in from other countries. Indeed, for all these countries, there is immunization going on. I mean, for other diseases other than COVID. And most of the vaccines that we're having, they are all cold chain commodities, okay? Well, they may be running from 2 to 8 degrees, but at least they are cold chain commodities. So we need to see what is the existing infrastructure in place, okay? For example, how are the current vaccines being handled? If that can be answered, and then we see how we can strengthen that to ensure that now they can also take on this new role, which is coming in with COVID. And the other is the regulatory agencies. Most of the African countries have regulatory agencies which are handling medicines. And this is where I see as a loophole and a gap. When commodities arrive at the airport, the import verification certificates are not done, they are not yet cleared, and all this. So we need to work closely with regulatory agencies to see that these commodities are pre-cleared, that on arrival, they are just transitioned to the rightful warehouse. And then the other thing that I've seen happening in Uganda is that the National Medical Stores, which also handles the other vaccines, with the moment the vaccines are being planned to arrive, always National Medical Stores is very available at the airport to receive these commodities, so there is no wastage of time. And for it, it has also the cold chain capacity to go up to 80 degrees, negative 80 degrees Celsius, which can handle all those Pfizers and all that. So if we work with the existing infrastructure, that would be very good, because most of the airports, just like my colleague said, they don't have the capacity to warehouse these commodities at the airport, awaiting clearance and all that. So we need to work with the existing infrastructure, the warehouses and the authorities, that's the regulatory agencies, to see that there is no wastage of time at the airport on arrival. Over. Thank you.
Thanks, Anthony. And I absolutely hear you. And maybe if I can get a thought from a different angle, not necessarily from airport infrastructure, but from a dry ice capability point of view, as we just mentioned, we have various temperature requirements, and in the 42 countries we currently operate, we only have about 17 who have localized in-country dry ice production capability. So if I could have a wish that infrastructure would increase in terms of dry ice capabilities, because at some point we're flying and position around dry ice in order to pick up or deliver shipments like that. So that's certainly something I'd like to see in terms of infrastructure, not only in airports, but in general to keep the supply chain intact. Any comments, final comments from you on that question, Da?
Yeah, just if I can add here, it's just that I think countries should also be proactive. We know the specification of products that are arriving, and we need to take all precautions, like getting paperwork completed, customs clearance completed, everything completed. So once the product arrives, it leaves immediately to, as Anthony said, it leaves immediately to the central medical store or to where the product should be stored. So that's the first one. And I think the carrier also should even take all the precaution even before sending the products that are like temperature sensitive. They should require all the paperwork sent. Do you have all customs clearance paper completed, so there is no time that will be wasted at the airport premises waiting for a document to be signed, import authorization or import exoneration or anything like that. So I think country should be proactive, but also carriers should also take all precautions that these are really sensitive product, need specific storage condition. So let's get everything done. So once it's on the ground, it leaves immediately to the central medical store or to where it should be stored. Thank you, over.
Absolutely, and thanks for that. So let's move on to another question. This one is addressed to Jean-Cédric. I'll read it out and obviously invite the other panelists to also jump in. Here it goes. The potential role of intergovernmental coordination and the use of Africa's continental free trade zone to create a humanitarian logistics corridor resulted in the creation of the Africa Medical Supply Platform, AMSP. It is a strategy for addressing the competing pressures of quality regulation and supply chain optimization. And it is accessible only to pre-vetted buyers, initially large public sector producers, whilst riding on intergovernmental mechanisms to drive pooled procurement model. Do you think this platform would work? And what are the drawbacks, if any at all?
So I'm not familiar with the platform, to be honest. So what we are trying to do is definitely increasing the capacity on the continent to procure pharmaceutical and vaccines. We have seen over the last months a lot of initiatives from the African Union supported by organizations like WHO, like UNICEF. It is a long journey. It requires a lot of quality control. It requires a lot of inspections and making sure that we have the right product. But it's definitely, immunization is not different than other pharmaceuticals. And when we see, I'm maybe going to do a shift here to another product, but one of the product that is the mostly used on development and humanitarian relief activities is ready-to-use therapeutic food, which was in the past only produced in France. And now we have production capacity in Kenya, we have production capacity in South Africa, we have production capacity in Niger, Nigeria, Benin, and it works. And in a region like Western and Central Africa that requires more than 1.8 million cartons of IUTF, the production will be in Western and Central Africa above 2 million cartons. So that is creating, and all the previous discussion on import, on custom clearance, on storage, etc., will make it easier if we can buy close to the beneficiary. This is also the objective for pharmaceutical and immunization products in the future, is definitely to have as much as possible production locally in an economical community that can have free distribution and free exchange between the different stakeholders. So definitely it's something that we all support, but it's not going to happen overnight. That's something that we all need to be aware of. It's not in one day that we will be able to produce vaccines on the continent, but we have already good partners, strong partners with strong experience in the field, in this area, that will be able to invest in. And we have also a lot of government that are ready to host such a kind of production. And the African Union with different partners are definitely going in that direction.
Remo, perhaps I can just add my comments. Last year, we started doing some contracts for the African Medical Supply Platform, which is an initiative of the African Union. And it's a fantastic platform. And again, this is again going back to what I talked about earlier, is about the use of technology. Now, the AMSP platform was actually created by an e-commerce company called Django. And it was fully supported by the African Union. And they actually created this platform which allows a lot of products like PPEs, oxygen concentrators, medical gowns, to actually be vetted by the platform. And it also gives opportunities for the 54 African Union member countries to buy from the platform under a finance scheme which has been supported by Afri-Exim Bank. So we've actually seen the platform working extremely well. And I believe a lot of the countries in Africa were able to buy through the platform. They were able to get lower prices because when you buy as a continent through the platform, you get a better price advantage compared to buying individually. And I really believe that's where the platform has done very well. And I've also seen to a certain extent that they're also trying to do the same thing with vaccines, which has proven to be a bit difficult because of the fact that you have the COVAX corridor, you've actually got the AWAT, you've also got the private donations. So at some point in time, I believe there's been some challenges in implementing the vaccine strategy through the platform, but I really am a big advocate of e-commerce platforms which can be used for improving the procurement and the supply of not only COVID vaccines, but also with regards to the PPEs and everything else that actually comes with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjeev. Any other comments on either the Africa Medical Supply Platform? Thanks for sharing that insight with us, Sanjeev, or other distribution platforms or ways of accessing.
Yeah, if I can add just to this platform, that there is another platform called Wambo, that is a global fund platform, and it's the same principles. It's provide economy of scale, so reduced price. But I think where we will need to focus to prepare countries to use this platform in an efficient manner is to support them in terms of procurement capabilities. The e-procurement, which is now really the new birth, we need to support countries to do this e-procurement, to understand what is e-procurement, how they can benefit from this platform, how they have to really adapt their own procurement regulation to this kind of platform where there is no competition as asked by the local or national regulation, but it's transparent, it's open, it's supported, and it can be used using the economy of scale to get reduced prices, but also good quality products. So we have to work on both directions, preparing this platform, but also supporting countries, providing technical assistance to countries to be able to use this platform in the best manner.
Anthony, any?
Yes, thank you so much, colleagues. True, these platforms actually are very important, and just from an economic point of view, they bring on board the economies of scale. That when you procure in bulk and when you put together your source as buyers, and you procure in bulk, I mean, you should be in position to get it cheaper. The challenge we have is that the various countries are run differently. In Uganda, currently, I think it's majorly only the TSM, which is managed by Commonics component for a few, for ARVs, which is bought using that type of platform. And then the other is the Global Fund procurement mechanism. But the other products, the essential medicine and all this, they are all verticalized and they are all individual, every individual warehouse is procuring independently, including the national medical stores. So we could easily put together the different warehouses in Africa, and then we support them. But the challenge is that there are various regulations governing procurement of these commodities across the different countries. So it will need a lot of energies and a lot of TA. But what we could do is maybe to ride on the regionalizations. We have the East African community, we have ECOWAS, we have SADC, and all these. If we could group them that way and we support them from that angle, then it would be very possible, and indeed it will come as an advantage to the African community. They will get cheaper, but also we need to make sure that this that does not work into becoming a rate-limiting step, that we affect the flow of the commodities and the fast acquisition of commodities because of chasing a pool procurement. Over.
Thank you, Anthony, and thanks for your contribution, fellow panelists. And and I think Charles-Cedric mentioned, I think the positive news towards that is really that we start being able to produce with him within Africa. I think hopefully that enables and facilitates the whole distribution further, and eventually and hopefully a price as well, because you mentioned it, that that's certainly a topic of concern. Let me move to another question, which is addressed to you, Anthony. Health product supply chains in many African countries are fraught with many problems. Ineffective supply chains that weaken the overall health system ability to respond to the healthcare needs of the population and put treatment program at risk. What are the key areas of reform to ensure that supply chains enable, or at least do not impede, achieving the targeted health outcomes?
Okay, thank you so much, colleagues. A number of reforms could come up, but also we have a lot of opportunities coming up. But above all, we need to make sure that we review the current supply chains across the various countries, because the various African countries at different levels of performance in supply chain. So we need to review, and so that we can offer a tailor-made support to improve and to ensure that there's a sustainable supply chain mechanisms in place. The other is about regulatory systems. We need to see that the regulatory systems are strengthened, because in Africa, we are at different levels. I mean, you find some countries have strong regulatory systems, others are very weak, particularly for health commodities. And this compromises the quality of supply chain and quality of commodities that we send to our populations. And amazingly, Africa is where we have porous borders across. So when your neighbor has weak regulatory systems, definitely it's going to flow into the neighboring country, and then we get such issues. But the other is that we need to see that we bring on board and strongly we engage the private sector. The private, we have quite a booming private sector, which we need to make sure we bring on board and we engage for augmented performance. So we need to make sure we utilize the opportunities that are existing in the private sector, both in warehousing, procurement, warehousing, distribution of these commodities to the end user, but also to bring on board the education systems. I mean, the schools. We have the universities, we have the health institutes. We need to make sure that these are also brought on board, so that it's a holistic approach, that everyone who's coming from these universities is at least having some bit of supply chain within. So we need to work with the institutes and also with the national cultural development centers to see that we review this and we integrate it. This happened in Uganda, and I'm glad to report that in most courses, which are healthcare courses in Uganda currently, everyone comes out where at least knows how to manage a health product. For it to happen, it took us a bit of time as MSH, but at least I'm glad to report that it was integrated, and that is very good. So we need to look through all those, right from the center up to the last user at subnational level, so that we strengthen them across the system. Thank you.
Thanks, Anthony. And as we can hear, and I think the whole conversation earlier during the panel, and now on the conversation, we have room for improvement on various levels, needs to improve, and I think we only can do this in a collaborative effort, where the private sector, governmental sector, everybody joins in and joins forces in order to make this an overall success. Any other thoughts from the fellow panelists on improvements or on topics where your heart is close? Because we need to come to an end of this half an hour Q&A as well. So please share with me your last final thoughts on how we can further improve and fight this pandemic together.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. If I can add, I think Anthony said really everything. That's what he said, I think covers everything. But the problem, as he said, the problem is really very big from workforce development to enabling environment to distribution to regulation. It's really vast. So, and there are competing priorities. Where do we start? What are the priorities? And it will depend from countries to countries because, as he said, they are at a different level. But if I give the example of DRC, for example, where we have a lot, the supply chain have a lot of problem. What we did for the project that I support is that we said, okay, let's make sure that the product arrive to the patients, which is focusing and supporting the last mile distribution, what we call the integrated last mile distribution, to make sure that once the product arrive at central level or at regional level, they reach the patient as soon as possible. So at least we have this addressed. The other focus that we are doing right now in DRC is to support the information system, the health product information systems. So that can support to make the right decision using data. So that's the two angles that we are now focusing to make sure that we reach the patient as soon as possible, but also we collect the information to make right decisions. On top of that, we are conducting what we call the national supply chain assessment, a national supply chain assessment to what will cover the whole provinces in the country. It's a big country. And from that, we'll look at the challenges and together with the national stakeholders, with the government, we'll decide what kind of priorities we need to take now to optimize the supply chain, to make it respond to the needs, but to integrate it, which Anthony also said about supply chain integration, which is we cannot support a country, supply chain countries, when we have many parallel supply chains. Now let's see how can we integrate supply chains, how can we optimize it, how can we reduce costs, how can we make it really operational and functional, and how can we reach the patient as soon as possible with the minimum of cost possible.
Thank you. We're running out of time. We have 3 minutes left. So I would ask Jean-Cédric and Sanjeev and Anthony just to give us the last thoughts, maybe an elevator speech, 30 seconds, with your condensed message based on the conversation we just had on a very serious topic, which is fighting a worldwide pandemic, particularly in Africa. Jean-Cédric, you want to start?
Thank you. Yeah, I think a lot of has been said. And I think we are in a sprint mode. We need to reach as much as possible the population in the decentralized level in each country. We need also the facilitation to allow us to import all the vaccines and the devices. And I think we talk a lot about vaccines. Maybe my pitch would be about devices. We receive more and more donations, and these are most welcome. And thank you for all the support around the world. But don't forget the devices. The devices are key essential elements of the vaccinations. This can slow down, having not the devices can slow down the administration of the campaign. Can also be a risk because we will take then devices from routine immunization and risk for deterioration of the routine immunization. So my pitch is to continue the collegial and solidary work around the world to help all and each other and every country and on the continent, African continent certainly, to make sure that we can deliver all the vaccines, the devices and the equipment for additional storage as soon as possible to allow the Minister of Health to administrate the campaigns as fast as possible. So thank you for all your support.
Thank you. Sanjeev. You're on. Yeah.
Sorry, I just have 3 things to say. The pandemic is not over yet. That's number 1. Number 2, vaccines do not save lives. Vaccination saves lives. And my third point is no one is safe until everyone is safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjeev. Anthony, over to you.
Okay, also 2 to 3 things to do here is 1, we need to recognize that again, we are still in the pandemic, but we need to utilize the opportunity that this pandemic comes with to ensure that we supreme, we jump and we jump miles. So for example, the pandemic has exposed us and it has showed us the weaknesses which we have in supply chain. We need to make sure we close those gaps. That's number one. Number two is let us try as much as we can, make sure we use the ICT capacity which we have at the moment, because there's a lot of internet availability, computer availability coming up in Africa. Let us try to see that we use these systems and we use the data so that we can inform decisions, and we try.
I see that Anthony is blocked. So yeah, thank you very much for attending. I think we got great insights from all the fellow panelists. It was a pleasure being part of this. Thank you very much for your attention, ladies and gentlemen. I wish you all a good rest of conference. Stay safe and stay healthy, and we rest our case, and there's lots to be done still, and let's get it done. All the best and bye-bye.